It's the 26th. I told you the 19th. The workshop? It's not tomorrow, it's next week. Did I told you in the email? I saw you sitting out there.
Good evening and welcome to a regular meeting of the Oak Harbor City Council. Today is February 18th. It is 6 p.m. I'd like to call this regular meeting to order. I'd like to invite you to stand and join us tonight in an invocation led by our own Councilor Bill Larson, and then following that I will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Councilor?
Thank you, Mayor. Please pray with me. Lord, we humbly come before you today in a spirit of gratitude and thanksgiving. We acknowledge all good things in our lives are gifts from you, freely given. We thank you for this beautiful portion of your creation we get to call home. Father, help us to be good stewards of this place. Give us hearts for discernment and enable each and every one of us to willfully listen and hear one another as we navigate through the many issues to come before us. We ask for wisdom, understanding, and compassion to rule the day. And Lord, may we follow your commandment to your disciples as you spoke to them in John 13:34, when you said, "Love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another." Lord, help us understand that in government, in business, as in any other relationship, there is always room for love, which can exist in the presence of disagreement and which can certainly coexist with reasonable discourse. Father, we thank you for all these blessings, and we ask you to guide us in our deliberation. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Councilor. Please join me in the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, this evening we understand that our Mayor Pro Tem will not be able to join us tonight. She has an excused absence, although I would entertain a motion to excuse her from the council. Yes, Councilor.
I move to excuse Mayor Pro Tem Munns.
We've got a motion second. Motion by Councilor Wassinger, second by Councilor Heisen to excuse Mayor Pro Tem Munns from tonight's meeting. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, passes unanimously. We'll move on to the agenda. Anybody want to change the agenda? Doesn't look like it. We will just start in then by going to item number 2C. Item 2C tonight is a community presentation, and I think we have with us John Van Dalen from the employer support of the Garden Reserve for a community presentation. John?
Thank you, sir. I'm here for two reasons. One, the employer support of the Garden Reserves is the Defense Department group of volunteers. There's about 4,700 of us in the United States, Guam, Puerto Rico, Hawaii, and Alaska. There's about 80 of us here in Washington State. We do two things. One of them is we're ombudsmen, where we help employers and employees resolve employment problems when they get deployed, have to go on active duty for training, that sort of thing. The other part is twofold. One of them is what is called a statement of support. Essentially, the city, the government, the business adheres to the basic law, which is the USERRA, which is the Uniform Employment and Reemployment Act of 1972, because the National Guard and the Reserves and the active duty, we no longer have the draft. And the reserves, including the National Guard, have to fill in quite a bit of the work that the active duty can't support. So they also come in and fill in for those. I've gone to Korea to put in some electronics for the Air Force several times, and other places around the country, because as a National Guardsman myself. I am now retired. But the statement of support would hang in a lobby to show people that you do adhere, and it seems that Oak Harbor does do well hiring vets and active National Guard and reservists. So I'd like to, if we got a moment, I'd like the three of you to stand right over here so we can sign those three, the chief of fire, chief of police, and the mayors. Can we do that, or near you, someplace?
How about we meet over by the police chief?
If that's okay with you, sir.
Okay, we'll do that for just very briefly.
It'll only take a
picture.
second.
Okay.
And who's got my camera? Oh,
Still this one, everything should
yeah. And if we could have the act of signing them would be great, even if it looks like it.
Okay.
Thank you. Now, those go to your respective offices and for your sorry, and your offices. Thank you. Now, the second of the second part, along with the statement of support, we also have an awards program. There's about 6 awards. The first one is usually given, well, I'll start with the top. It's a Freedom Award that 15 companies and government agencies around the country are invited back to Washington, D.C., presented by the Department of Defense, Secretary of Defense, once a year. 5 government, 5 small businesses, 5 large businesses. That's why it gets a little equal. Then it comes to the first one that's given out called My Boss is a Patriot, or the Patriot Award. And we have one here tonight for the Chief of Police. And I'd like to present that with him. Tony? These are derived from the active reservists and active National Guardmen and women in your employment. Tony has one here for his chief. And it's basically is the plaque that he will receive. This is his personal plaque. It'll go on his desk. Or take it home with him. Sir?
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
Tony? Thank you.
Yeah.
What's that?
We're looking for our photographer here. Where'd she disappear to? Oh, she's over there.
That's right. You done?
Go ahead and let's get a real close one here. Thank you. And bits and bytes are cheap.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you.
Unexpected. Appreciate it.
I was hoping that would be. And I will give you back to your meeting, and I thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. Is there any questions?
Yes, John, we have one up here.
Yes. and-
Right here, John.
Where am I going? Oh,
Counselor Hyde.
I'm sorry.
Could you provide a little bit of background on why the chief just got that?
Oh, yes. Let me read a little
I
bit,
believe we have a reservist in the
since I
police
don't
force.
have this memorized. Basically, Tony wrote that the chief of police have several reserve members in the Coast Guard and the Navy currently employed with the police department. The chief actively supports the military by allowing flexible work hours, education, and support obligations for their drill service. Sometimes the drill, I know the Army's gone to a 3-day weekend versus a 2-day weekend, so it's changed dramatically. Attending military schools and mobilizations, he's been able to provide support for the reservists and the Guard that work for him. And it's a challenge, I understand that. Because the company I worked for, I had challenges. Because I was the only one that did what the company needed at that time. But, so when I was gone, I was gone. So, thank you, Chief. I appreciate it. And the city, thank you. Any other questions?
Thank you, John.
I am done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor, can I say a 30-second piece?
Yes, you can.
So, just real quick, I very much appreciate it. Had no clue. I saw my guys lining up here, and I go, "What the heck are they here for?" And I very much appreciate it. And I wish I could take credit for it. I think we've hired a couple since I've been here that are Navy, but you had a well-established military presence within our organization prior to my getting here. Of course, I served 3 years in the Army way back when. I believe in the service, especially as a military town. I think it's very important for us to support what they do and how they protect our country. So thank you guys very much and thanks for coming over. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Chief. Okay, we will now at this time move on to our citizen comment period. So now is the time that citizens may comment on subjects of interest not listed on the agenda or items listed on the consent agenda. To ensure comments are recorded properly, please state your name clearly into the microphone. Please limit comments to 3 minutes to ensure all citizens have sufficient time to speak. So if you're here to talk about something that's on the agenda, we'll wait until that. But if you're here for something on the consent agenda or something else, now's open public comment time. Okay. So Barbara, Arms, or
Barbara Arms, I live at 351 Northeast Newton Loop, Oak Harbor, Washington. And I spoke last time at the meeting about the rates, and I'm kind of waiting to hear what you've all decided what you're going to do. I put several suggestions on how we could reduce the rates by, changing how we did our garbage, going online for our bills, a whole host of agendas. And so I'm hoping that later in the meeting that will be addressed, and we'll come up with some resolutions so we don't have to, the citizens don't have to bear the burden of all that. Plus, we know that
Barbara?
we're having.
So we do have a section,
Ken.
and that'll be a great opportunity to
Okay,
specifically talk about rates.
that's what I wanted to make sure we were getting to.
Yep. That's item number 6B. It's not too far away, actually. Thank you. Any other citizen comments about anything else? Okay, seeing none, we will move on to our consent agenda. Looks like we have 2 items tonight. Can't remember such a small consent agenda. And if we don't have any questions about those, they will be approved as presented. We'll move on to my report. Got just a couple of brief things. The National League of City Conference is March 8th to the 11th. We've got a couple of counselors headed that way. Council Member Servadius and Council Member Heisen will be attending. That's in Washington, D.C. on March 8th to the 11th. In addition, Mayor Pro Tem Munns and I will travel to D.C. for the annual Pentagon visit, and Councilors Servadius and Heisen will join us at the Pentagon on March 12th. That's one day there. So, and generally we have somebody from the county and somebody from the NAS Whidbey Task Force who will join us on that day. And then aside from that, our next council workshop is next week, Wednesday, February 26th at 5 p.m. in this room. And then our next actual city council meeting is Tuesday, March 3rd at 6 p.m. again in this room. So with that concludes my comments, and I'll turn to council members. Any council members have any comments for tonight? Okay, seeing none, we'll go to the city administrator, Mr. Olborn.
Yeah, I think I'll be brief too. I think you reiterated the schedule and just a little bit more detail is attached to you, just reminders of upcoming meetings. And then certainly with one of the items on the agenda regarding the declaration of emergency, I certainly want to thank the staff for the hard work in working through the issues that we had with the recent rains and the storm and the effect it had on the wastewater treatment and the wastewater system to the city, and their effort in making sure things continue and minimized and mitigated the damage there and the effect. And so I certainly want to thank the long hours, a lot of staff that put in through that event. So I give my thanks to them for their efforts. And that concludes my remarks.
Okay. We will then move on to Area 6 on our agenda, public hearings and meetings. To speak during a scheduled public hearing or meeting, please sign in, but if you don't, you'll still have an opportunity. To ensure comments are properly recorded, please state your name clearly into the microphone. Limit your comments to 3 minutes to make sure everyone has sufficient time to speak. Item number 6A is ordinance number 1898, Central Business District Development Permit Moratorium Extension. We have our Director of Development Services, Steve Powers.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. I'll be brief this evening since we discussed this with you at your workshop last month. As you know, in August of 2019, the council adopted Ordinance 1883, which imposed a 6-month moratorium on certain kinds of development permits within our central business district. Since that time, staff has been working to conduct research in terms of what other communities have done. We've worked with our planning commission. We've met with Main Street and their associates on a couple of different occasions. And I'm pleased to say I think we're making good progress. But we're not going to be done before the end of the moratorium, as we explained at your workshop last month. So state law that allows for a moratorium to be imposed also allows for it to be extended, subject to two important things. One, council has to conduct an additional public hearing. And secondly, if you decide to extend it, you need to include a work plan in the ordinance which would extend the moratorium. We, of course, have provided you that work plan. It's on page 37 of the packet. It shows you tentatively how we would use the additional time, March through August. And so our recommendation to you this evening is that you conduct a public hearing and adopt this ordinance extending the moratorium for an additional 6-month period of time. I'd be happy to help you with your questions.
Okay, before we do that, we'll see if anybody from the public would like to speak to this item. Have any questions? Okay, seeing none, bring it back to the council. Any questions or input or motions or? Councilor Larson.
Thank you, Mayor. Having no other discussion, I recommend the motion that we move to adopt ordinance number 1898, extending the Central Business District Development Permit moratorium for 6 months and adopting a work program for the additional time.
Second.
Okay, we've got a motion and a second that reads just like in the packet. A motion by Councilor Larson, second by Councilor Heisen. Any other questions or input? All in favor? Oh, yes, Councilor Glassman.
Did you ask for public input? I'm sorry, did I miss
Yeah,
that?
yeah,
Okay,
I did.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I
that's-
just
That's okay.
went too fast.
That's pretty sure I did.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
Sure. Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that passes unanimously.
Thank you, Mayor and council.
Thank you, Mr. Powers. We will move on to item number 6B. This is ordinance number 1899, utility rate increases. And we have our finance director here, Patricia Soul. Patricia?
Thank you, Mayor. Tonight I'm going to present a PowerPoint just going through how the rates were developed and some of the history. But I do want to say that in your packet, I attached Sean Korn's presentation. He did correct some of the slides that were missing some information, so that's why those are in there. I'll just get started. So the overview of the presentation, I'm going to walk through the drivers of the rate setting process, the summary of proposed rates and total change, details by each utility, options that council can consider, and then discussions and questions that you may have. When you look at utility rates, there's 4 main drivers: operations and maintenance, debt service, planned capital improvement, and reserves. Currently, per policy, our reserves are set at 25% of revenues in each one of the utilities. Debt service for the city, we have in water fund, there's a Public Works Trust Fund loans in there, 2 of them, one for Troxel Road and the other one for Quiet Cove. The total annual outlay for that is $53,300 for water lines. Each one of the values remaining, so the 1231 balance, Troxel Road is $137,887. That debt ends June 1st of 2025. Quiet Cove is $198,542, and that debt ends June 1st of 2026. Storm Drain has one loan through the Public Works Trust Fund for $703,017 that would end on June 1st of 2031. That annual payment is $60,400 approximately. It varies up or down as the years go by. Wastewater is where our significant loans are. Our SRF loans total $103,499. They vary between 1.2% and 2.7%. They end between 2036 and 2038. Revenue bonds, $25,720,000. They vary between 3.13% and 4%. They end in 2046. Our annual debt service is $7,073,159 annually, and it's for the plant and the outfall. The next one is our planned capital projects. Our long-term capital plan was part of the 2019-20 budget. Projects were identified for each utility, funding out for 6 years. And the CIP is part of the comprehensive plan update annually from the Development Services Department. This is just a picture, can't see it very well, but that's what came in your budget document. Water is the salmon color, green stormwater, green sewer, and then storm drains the yellow. And this is the one where it kind of shows over the 6 years when those projects are planned to be done. The need for reserves. This is MRSC, GFOA, all the regulatory agencies say you need to plan to have some form of reserves. They need to be considered for future outlays of capital and debt service, liability accruals for employee buyouts, vacation, comp time, sick, emergency and unforeseen events that would trigger the need. So that's the need for reserves. Summary of proposed changes. This is the overarching proposed changes to the rates. So currently, I'm just going to go by totals. Currently, for a single family with a 5/8 to 3/4 inch line using 600 cubic feet of water and using a 35-gallon bin, that was the assumptions made, it's $184.58. In 2020, the bill would be $196.24 if the proposed rates were implemented. In 2021, the proposed amount would be $208.71, and in 2022 it would be $222.30. A change in 2020 of $11.66 per month, a change of $12.47 per month in 2021, and a change of $13.59 in 2022. The next one's a visual. I think visual speaks just as good as the words, but it breaks it out by each utility. The salmon, of course, is the largest, which is the wastewater. The other ones, it shows them separately. I'm going to go through each fund separately just to talk through the changes and the history. So our last rate increase for the water fund was on 12/20 of 2015 for fiscal year 2016. Ordinance 1587 was passed on 10/6 of 2010 for 6 years worth of rates. Rates remain the same since 2006 for 4 years. The capital projects list for the rate study is this list here. I included the whole out through 2027 to show the rates, of course, aren't proposed out that far, but it shows what was built into the rate model. And this is stuff for you guys that you already should have, but if there's anything on there, we can talk about questions later. This is Sean Korn's slide. I put it in here because it demonstrates a couple of things. Does this have a pointer on it? Yeah. This one? Okay. So, okay, there it is. So down here, the dotted line, that is the 25% of
Patricia,
reserves. Yes.
Will you go that way, please? So
Oh,
we
sorry,
can all see it
yep,
too?
yep. The dotted line, 25% of reserves. So the goal that he set was by 2023 that we would use up all of these reserves, keep the rates down by using those up, but not go below the 25% of reserves. That's key to know. The next one is the breakdown by month or by year for the monthly impact to the water bill, just water only. So the water bill is from 2011 through 2022. 4 years where it stayed the same as where that curved line is at for you. And the change per year, the rates proposed would go from $47.70 to $49.59, which is an increase of $1.89. And then in 2021, it'd go to $51.58, which is an increase of $1.99. And then in 2022, it would go to $53.91, which is an increase of $2.33. The next fund is the storm drain fund. The last rate change on the storm drain fund was on 12/20 of 2015 for fiscal year 2016. Ordinance 1684 was passed on 2/4 of 2014 for a 2-year rate adjustment. The rates have remained the same since 2016 for 4 years. This is a list of capital projects that are built into the rates. This one out here is key. One of the reasons why it's actually a planned project due to DOE required retrofits. So when you look at the next graph, that'll explain why that's important. So on this graph, you'll see that the rates hit the 25% here, and then he starts building them. So this is using up rates for these years. We hit the 25% reserve, and then he starts building them. He's building them for this project right here. So trying to build ahead so that the funding is there for the project. And then the monthly impact to the storm drain under that plan is it would go from $14.22 to $14.79, or 57-cent increase for 2020. 2021 would be a 59-cent increase, going up to $15.38 a month. And then 2022 would go to 16, or a 62-cent increase. Solid waste fund. The last rate increase in the solid waste fund was in 2007. The rates have remained the same for the past 12 years. The rates this year were impacted by 2 large impacts to the solid waste fund. Island County disposal tip fee increased, and we'll go through that in the next slide. And island disposal recycle rate also increased. So if you look at the tip fees, whoa, let's do that again. Wrong button. So over here, this is the the recycling fees. That went up 200% from 1/1 of 18 through 6/1 of 19. The rates were $45 in 2018, January, and then in October of 1 of 18, they went to $94.35, and then on June 1st of 19, they went to $135. So it was literally a 200% increase. The Island County disposal, or the tipping fee down here, that went up 25%. It went from $109 to $137. That did have an impact on the rate study amounts. This is the other one, the other slide. Both of these slides are Sean Korn's, by the way, too, the last one and this one. So this one here shows that we are utilizing fund balance, and he's planning for us to be at 25% of fund balance out in 2024. So rates are only going to go through 2022 if they're approved, but he shows how he built into the model to try to get us back up to to utilize what fund balance we have to get us to 25%. The impact to the solid waste bill, it goes up in 2020 $1.49 or $21.39 from 1990. In 2021, it goes up to $22.99 or $1.60, and then or 2021, and in 2022, it goes to $24.72 or $1.73 more. But this highlight down here is the time frame where nothing changed. Also, this is for a 35-gallon bin, so it's just the average size that most people have. The wastewater fund. The last rate increase was on 12/20 of 2018 for fiscal year 2019. It was ordinance number 1760 that passed in 2016. Public meetings have occurred on this fund since 2010 going forward, but the ones that since the building started were started March 15th of 2016 up until January 22nd of 2020. I'll go into more detail later, but these are the different meetings that have occurred regarding looking at the rates and trying to come up with an amount as the plant was being built. The budgets are based on estimates in the wastewater fund. In 2019, some things that were brought up by Sean occurred. The public utility rates went up in 19, and there were multiple reasons for that. The dryer, we'll go into detail on that a little later, public utility costs, electric, water, sewer, solid waste, and storm drain, and insurance. Capital projects, the final GMP was presented and approved on April 17th of 2018. The last rate analysis was on May 1st of 2018 before the one that happened in January this year. Budget estimates versus actual. So again, budgets are based on estimates. The plant began operations in November of 2018. Electricity went up and down, but when the dryer testing was happening and the new plant operations, there was some sporadic billing happening. There was a few things happening that occurred during the startup of the plant. Water, we had a water leak in April 2019 that drove up some of the water costs. And disposal fees were higher than anticipated because as the dryers were being calibrated, the solid waste had to be moved, disposed of via that form instead of using the dryer. The estimated costs were calculated before the plant started up and were based on known information at the time. Insurance. Insurance is based on the value of the property and liability for the city. The cost of building finalized in 2018 after the budget was set up and prior rate studies occurred. Liability and property rates increased 5% for 2019. We could look at, this is one of those options for council, we currently insure the building at, the value of the building is, it's insured for $120 million and change with a $5,000 deductible. If we increase that deductible to $25,000 in fiscal year 2020, it would decrease our cost by $57,608. If we increase the deductible to $50,000, it would decrease the cost by $68,410. So these are options that could happen. This isn't significant in the rates itself, because these numbers for the operation of the plant, but they would make a difference. They're something that may help. But again, this is something that we can bring forward and council can consider as an option. The rate studies with varying costs. There have been multiple rate studies with multiple cost changes as the clean water facility was built. Estimates are only that. Again, we can't predict the future, but we can make our best estimate. Operating costs on a new plant can vary from what is expected versus what actually occurs, as we've found with some of the things that they had to deal with. I went through kind of the rate study process and what the rates were based on since September 21st of 2010. First rate study that I could find that was done specific to building of the plant, and it was based on using a $70 million plant that was located at the lagoon site with activated sludge. The next look at rates were in March 15th of 2016. The rate study used $120 million for an MBR facility. The next rates, again, were looked at in September of 2016 using $121.9 million with different funding options, because at the time they initially thought it would be mainly bond funded. May 1st of 2018, rate study used $140 million with SRF and bond financing, so it used the financing that we ended up doing. And then January 22nd, 2020, the rate study used the final plant cost of around $148 million with actuals on financing and fund balances used. It's kind of a moving target when you go through and look at all these different things and different amounts and different circumstances. But the process was implemented to keep council informed as the plant was built. I did a history of wastewater rates. In anticipation of the plant being built, the rates started being increased in 2010 and continued through 2019. If you look at from 2011 to 2016, rates in 2011 were increased to $40, and they increased yearly up until 2016, where they were at $64.75. Ordinance 1587 increased $24.75 over 5 years. Clean water facility cost at that time was averaged to be $70 million, and at the lagoon site, as I stated before. Then if you look at 17, 18, and 19, that was via ordinance 1760 with the clean water facility cost estimated at $120 million. This final proposed rates are proposed at the actual cost of $148 million and with 1 year of operations behind the numbers. So the numbers have been adjusted based on that. The rates proposed during the process show how much they varied. I just wanted to give an example. So the March 16th study had rates in 2021 at $135.90. September 16th had them at $119. And May of 18 had them at $112. So they went everywhere, up and down, based on what numbers and what information was available at the time. This is very hard to see up there on the board, and I'm very sorry, but this is a comparison that showed in 2013 where Oak Harbor's rates were in comparison with other cities. This was as we were trying to ramp our rates up to prepare for some of these cities that already had built or were in the process of building a plant, Blaine being the main one. And in 2013, their rates were at almost $100. And I don't know how far into the build they were at that time. This is just history showing that that was part of the consideration done during it. It was in the wastewater facilities plan at the time. Capital projects for the wastewater treatment plant, there's not a lot because the main capital is the plant. So they have some sewer line replacements and force main, other slip line replacements, things that they try, in the rate study, they tried to minimize the planned improvements in recognition of the fact that we have a brand new plant. Wastewater, this is again Sean's slide. It shows here, again, in the right hand, that we're using up the rest of the fund balance that's left and trying to keep it at 25% of the revenues. The monthly wastewater bill, this is the largest impact. In 2020, the rate would go up to $110.47 if passed, and that's a $7.71 increase monthly. 2021, it would be an $8.29 increase, and in 2022, it would be an $8.29 in 21 and $8.91 in 22. So I always like to bring options for council to consider. So, and the mayor also likes to see options. So these are the options that I could come up with. But during discussion, if other options come up, they all should be considered. So, of course, option one is approve the ordinance presented for 3 years of rates on all utilities. I'll go into more detail on that on the next page. Approve only selected utility rates. Postpone the rate increase until 2021. Examine and change planned capital projects. Council change the reserve percent from 25% to a lower amount. Approve ordinance as presented. So, of course, the motion to approve the ordinance. Approximate cost increase, monthly increase in total for all of the utilities, as I described before, is $11.66 for 2020, $12.47 for 2021, and $13.59 for 2022. And then annually, that breaks out to $93.28, because there's only 8 months in 2020 that the rate would apply. 2021 would be $149.64 in addition, and 2022 would be $163.08 in addition. Staff recommends this action as rate study demonstrated need for increases to keep reserves at 25% and cover the estimated costs through 2022. Only approve selected utility rates. So I break this out, but I don't have to go into the detail. But each one of these has how much the monthly change is and the annual change is. So you've got water, storm drain on that, and then on the next page you have solid waste and wastewater. Those are for you to consider if that's an option you want to look at. Postpone rate increase until 2021. So I went back to our utility rate professional, Sean Korn, and asked him to recalculate what the rates would be in 2021 if we did not do any change to 2020. So if you look at 2021, right here, this is where it shows the change. So it would go from $184.58 to $217.72, which is an increase of $33.14. The next year would stay at $540 because the increase to wastewater would stay the same for 2 years. The ultimate increase would keep the reserves at 25, get the reserves to 25% and allow them to stay there. The next option is examine and change the capital projects on the plan. Capital improvements are a large driver in the setting of rates. So the questions to ask yourself, are the capital projects we have in place, are they needed to keep infrastructure in good condition? Can it be postponed? If so, at what cost or benefit? And then 25% balance in utilities. Is this reserve high enough or too high? A question that council can consider. Fixed expenditures, reducing services will not reduce this outlay. You're still going to have debt service. You're still going to have accrued liabilities. And if there's an emergency or catastrophic event, what value do we assign? Are we at a good spot, or do we think we could be lower, or do we need to be higher? And so that ends my presentation.
Okay, so before we discuss this here at council, I'd like to offer an opportunity for the public to come forward. Please try to limit your comments to 3 minutes if you would. Please state your name into the microphone. Welcome. Thanks for coming.
Good evening, council and citizens of Oak Harbor. My name is Ed Fry. I'm a citizen of Oak Harbor. Just a couple of questions for you to think about. I saw some things in there about Troxel Road for O&M. I thought Troxel was part of the county, not city. So I don't know why that would fall under our O&M. Employee cost to city budget, is that part of the city's budget, or do they distinguish the departments for their own finances for their employees? I thought they were a city employee, so I don't know why we'd be putting funds in for the water if they're a city employee. Another thing I have is, what I saw on those slides baffled me, is that we spent over $500 million on studies for a plant that cost $120 million. That baffled me. So I was just a little curious about that. Other cities' comparisons to ours, I saw some of the information, thanks to Mr. Councilman Servatius for letting me see that. One thing I'd like to be concerned about is that the city of Oak Harbor has different requirements than some of the other cities. Ours may be more stringent. Maybe we need more. Ours may be less stringent. So let's not just look at other cities at how high they are and think that we need to meet them. Maybe we need to, no kidding, take into consideration that what does it take to get us at that 25% benchmark, if that's what you guys vote on, and the council members vote on. However, why is the 25% there? Is it something in the future that we're already looking at? Then let's budget for that and meet that requirement rather than a percent. Let's budget for the cost so that we have it. And I might have missed that picture, so it might already be there. And I think with that, that's all I have to say, and thank you folks for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Fry. I think that I see counselors taking notes, and the way this will work is after the public comment, we'll try to address as many questions that are presented here as we can. We might ask staff to come back to do that. Generally, the council isn't going to try to answer immediately, but we'll try to get you some answers before the evening's over. So, thank you. And then next,
Evening, council members, Mr. Mayor. My name is Matt Ross. I've been an Oak Harbor resident off and on with broken time here in Oak Harbor for 14 years, and this is the first city council meeting that I've been to. And I came here just because I was concerned about the rise, obviously, in the rates, and so I understand the differences in the recycling and things like that. But the wastewater, obviously, being by far, the biggest driver. And so going back, what's not reflected was the original budgeting figures, understanding that it is a bit of a moving target. The target of that cost has moved quite a bit from the time that it was first budgeted to the time that it was finally done. And it just seems that there's more and more movement in that target and more rates that are increased. And so my question is twofold. One is at a time where we are discussing the importance of low-cost housing, a $40 increase in the next 3 years to utilities for a family is significant. And so what measures are going to be put into place to make sure that we're really putting a cap on that, so it's not just a blank check that's expensed off to the taxpayers? And then as we look in the future for another project, which we're already budgeting, what lessons have we learned from the construction of this plant to make sure that more astute project management laws and constraints are put in, and in your words, better stewardship? Those are the things that I'm concerned about. Thank you.
thank you, Mr. Ross. We appreciate that. Anyone else?
Hello, my name's James Stearman. I've only been a resident here about 5-6 years now, but I was kind of concerned about the difference in the amount of the billing between the water usage and the sewer. Appearance is threefold how much the sewer is to our water usage, and we're at the lowest rate as is. So to me, I'm looking at $26 comparison to $78 a month. I'm not sure exactly how many people are registered and are hooked up to the system. I'm guessing somewhere around 25,000 people. Is that a good guess? How many people are using the sewer system? Anyone have a answer?
We'll try to answer that with the number of accounts that we have. It's not near the population number.
Well, I mean, just, a number of accounts, because I was coming up with outrageous number of close to $2 million a month for our utilities that's being drawn in. And I know that we did get a new treatment plant, which is good. We got to keep up with times and prepare for our building. I was just concerned that that seems like an extreme amount of money, and I'm not seeing, I'm still looking at dirty water coming in and things like that and problems with everything going on, but in particular, I was just concerned that does anyone realize that that's an awful lot of money per month is almost $2 million, if anybody knows that. I could be wrong. I'm not sure exactly what the amount of people are that hooked up to the system, but I would love to know what that is. So thank you very much for your time. Have a good day.
Thank you. Mr. Sherman, I think it was. Sherman? Okay.
Good afternoon, I'm Neil Ryan. I've been with this town for since 2012. Piggybacking off of what everybody else was saying, it doesn't really make sense that we increase our prices for this sewer bill because we're building all these new neighborhoods, all these new homes. So wouldn't that mean with more people the price will go down, or does it say that this plant have a limit, so we have to build up the price to build a bigger plant in the future? So it basically comes down to supply and demand. So what are we going to do? Are we going to lower the price because we have more people coming in and more neighborhoods going in? Or do we reach a limit and still keep charging people more and more and more? So, and that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bryan. Anyone else? One more time, anyone else want to speak? Okay. Patricia, I know there were several questions asked. I know that the first question was Troxel Road. I know we have a water line that comes from the bridge, and we have our Public Works Director, Kathy Rosen. Welcome.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. The majority of our water comes from the Anacortes Water Treatment Plant on the Skagit River. Our transmission mains come from Sharps Corner, across Deception Pass Bridge, and into the city. When the project, and I don't remember what year that was, I'll have to look it up, but for Troxel Road, that project was a Washington State Department of Transportation road widening project, and they required us to move our water line out of their way for their road widening project. It's not that we're maintaining Troxel Road, it's that we had to move our water line so the state could widen the highway at that point. And we took out a Public Works Trust Fund loan to do that work. And it's the same thing with the Quiet Cove project. It was a state highway improvement project that required us to relocate our water transmission mains, and we have 2 of them out of the state's way. And we took out Public Works Trust Fund loans for those projects. Any questions on that?
Okay, so I wrote down some other questions, but I think I'll defer to council now at this point. And yes, Councilor Wassinger.
Yes, another part of the group of questions. So can you explain how I know it was a learning process for me as a city council member to learn how these different funds are paid for, are appropriated. So can you sort of explain the employee situation and how our utility fund and how those rates are set? So anything, they're self-sufficient funds, so the employees, if you could explain a little bit of that, you could probably do a lot better job than I could.
We're doing great.
Okay.
So all of our utilities are what we call proprietary funds. They are business-like funds that are operated in a government entity. They have to be self-supporting. They have to be able to produce revenue to cover their costs. So when rates are set, that's why we look at O&M, capital, debt service, and any of our fund balance requirements. We look into that fund only. We can't transfer between funds. It is prohibited by law.
And those employees that work in those departments, water, wastewater,
yes, they're part of the O&M.
They're part of that. So, you know, we have employees that aren't, that work here in City Hall, and us, for example, obviously we're not included in our salaries in any of these sort of utility funds. That's what I was trying to explain. They're different. There are some other things, and there's other questions. I took a lot of notes, so I just wanted to thank everybody while I'm speaking for coming and speaking to us and raising your concerns and your questions. We appreciate it. We all do, and thank you for being kind to us with your questions. I highlighted one, Mr. Ross mentioned lessons learned, and with the wastewater treatment plant, I came on, and this is no excuse, but kind of right at the start, maybe right after the construction had started going, and had to learn about this bid build versus this GCN process that we went through to build this plant. It's definitely been a learning curve for me, and it's a lesson learned. Some of the estimates were really off. And I have said that in public settings before, in workshops, and questioned how they could have been so off. So that is definitely a major lesson that I have learned stepping into this. I am not sure when, and if I will even be around when we have to perform another construction project this large. So that is something, thank you for that comment. It is something as we go through this process that all of us are learning and have learned lessons. Also, another thing that was mentioned by Mr. Ryan was new homes. So I know that, and this was a big, Councilmember Omberg was big on making sure that the Navy is done right properly if they can consider hooking up. We do have other big neighborhoods coming along down the pipeline, Waldron's, Gary Oaks, and other homes being built. Can you sort of explain how that factors into our rate studies and the rates that our current ratepayers are paying as new hookups are brought in?
So when the rate study was done, I think he used a 1% growth. Okay, so it was 1% growth factor for factoring in new homes being built. We didn't factor the Navy in because that is such a huge unknown and would have such a huge impact on the rates. We are hopeful that the negotiations go well. If that does happen, that should adjust or change the rate structure.
Councilor
So
go ahead.
if that does happen, would we do a new rate study
Absolutely.
or? Okay.
Yes. And that's one of the reasons that I felt 3 years was the farthest out we should go. And Kathy felt the same way because it is an unknown, but we're hopeful that within 3 years we will know for sure what's going to happen.
Okay. That's all for now. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilor Mack?
Thank you, Mayor. There's a lot of, first of all, I'd like to thank everybody for coming tonight, and also would like to commend all the staff, first responders for the rain incident we have. From what I understand, with all the emails, our plant was somewhat compromised, and I appreciate everybody, and I'm sure the council members as well, everybody's effort on that. I don't need to pull the wool over my constituents and all the ratepayers. This is a handful. These expenses are enormous. It's a burden on all of the ratepayers in the city limits. I don't know if there's an easy way out of this. I see some issues with a lot of different things. I question some of these numbers. So Patricia, you can correct me, and Kathy can correct me maybe, but at a workshop, I was given that the growth rate wasn't factored in here. Mr. Power said something about 0.5%. Now I'm hearing 1%.
And like I said, I'm not absolutely positive it was
Okay,
1%, but
so-
he did build a growth factor.
Okay, so I understand. So we may want to get someone in here from the Public Works Department and explain a few things on some expenses I'm seeing. There's different issues. We have the water, we have the wastewater, we have the solid waste, and we have the storm drain. I can't support some of these increases, but some of the things, there's not a lot we can do with the water we purchase from Anacorsa. And then for our solid waste, some of those prices are fixed. Those we're going to have to deal with. Both myself and the council, I'm sure, and the ratepayers of the city understand that the revenue from the city, majority of it's generated through the utilities department. However, we cannot keep burden our ratepayers with this. I'm looking at capital improvements for our the stormwater. I'm looking just shy of over $1 million this year for conveyance and east outfall and west outfall. I'm looking at some other issues. We have a brand new facility. It was compromised. We have sewer wastewater lines that are in serious issue. I don't know if this is being overlooked, if we need to be putting more funds in that. And then last but not least, perhaps this is a time where we need to be looking at some professionals, bringing them in, getting their opinions on this, and try to, instead of having the council and our staff making decisions on this, we need some experts on seeing the way out of this and some help basically figuring this out. Whether our credit's good, do we need to borrow? How can we keep the burden down on our ratepayers but still take care of the problems we're facing? So I don't know if anybody from the staff wants to give me a little insight on some of that. But, I mean, I'm questioning a few things here with a lot of different things.
So we have had professionals come in and tell us what capital projects we need, particularly in the water system. We have to do a comprehensive water system plan every 6 years by state law. So we have a consultant come in, they look at our water system, they look at future growth, they look at a 20-year projection of growth and identify projects that need to occur for growth, but they also look at the condition of our existing system. So we do get a list of capital projects out of the comprehensive water system plan that's required by law every 6 years. And that is what that CIP and the list that's in the presentation has been based on for that upcoming 6 years. It's based on a document called the Comprehensive Water System Plan. So we have had professionals come in and help us with that. And those are estimates that they came up with for those projects, and we've included them in our budget planning. With regards to stormwater, you will be seeing, you've seen a little bit of the stormwater plan at a workshop a couple of months ago. We're coming again later this month. It's the same kind of thing. They look at our system. We have a consultant, it's Gray and Osborne. They look at our system, our stormwater system. They look out 20 years. They look at, so what might be needed for growth, what problems we're having in our current system, and make recommendations and come up with cost estimates on those projects. And don't forget, we also have a permit, a stormwater permit, that's going to require us to do retrofit projects, and we talked about that at a recent council workshop as well. And so this plan, this rate analysis included kind of ramping up the rates so that when it comes time to do those retrofits, we don't have to have a huge jump in the rates, that it's kind of smoothed out and ramped up over time. So that's the stormwater. It will be time in this next budget to update our comprehensive sewer plan, which is the same kind of thing. We have a consultant come in, they look at our system, what's needed for growth, what is the condition, what projects are needed, and then we take that list and we put it into our capital planning, which also gets included in a rate analysis. Let's see, what's the other one? Solid waste. We generally don't have any capital projects in solid waste. Occasionally, when there's an annexation that comes in, Island Disposal will service that for 7 to 10 years. When that annexation agreement expires, then the city has to take over picking up that garbage and recycling and yard waste. And then we may have a capital purchase of new roll carts to serve that area. But we generally don't have large capital projects there. Solid waste, as you mentioned, is something that's been out of our control. And we haven't touched those rates, like Patricia mentioned, in 12 to 13 years. So I hope that answers your questions.
Yes, and thank you, Ms. Rosen. Well, I'm still confused as to why are we only want to go out 3 years, but yet your consultants are going out 20 years. No disrespect, but some of our citizens may not be here. I'm concerned about what we're hitting our community with in the next 4 years. And then I hear something from this person, I hear something from that person. In other words, are these capital improvement projects necessary on this side, or do they need to be shifted over here? In other words, my goal is I work for the community, and we're trying to hold these rates under control, and where the cuts can be made, such as conveyance, I thought some of this already got worked out. And in here, I think the council needs to see something in black and white as to what the growth is anticipated with these new projects coming online for this year, next year. In other words, a 36-month layout. Where do we hope to be with new homes online in the next 36 to 48 months to match the 36 to 48 months worth of rate increases? Now, maybe these can be brought under control a little bit. There's a lot of different options here with just the wastewater facility and storm drain. There's some options that some citizens, I've heard different things from my constituents on different options to go down in size. Also pick up bi-weekly instead of weekly. So I would like to see some new numbers shifted around. But we got bigger issues with the wastewater facility lines, not the plant. You've got a brand-new heart, but your arteries are giving out, and those need to be addressed, and I don't see those being addressed.
We will be having a discussion at the next workshop about I&I and the weather that we had over the period of, from the beginning of the year until the first week of February, and how that occurred. So that is coming, okay, at your next workshop.
Thank you.
I would like to address, if I may, Mayor, this issue of picking up recycling every other week. We have looked at that. It's been about 3, maybe 4 years, but you will be picking up twice as much as we do weekly, every other week. So our costs of disposal are not going to go down. The amount of recycling is going to pretty much remain the same, even if we pick it up every other week. And there's a cost to dispose of that of $135 a ton. We still have to have the equipment to pick that up, so the costs don't get reduced. And then we have to have the staff to still go out and do it, because the truck is going to fill up faster if we're picking up twice as much on pickup day. So, you know, we may have to run 2 trucks on that day. So the costs have not really penciled out when we've looked at that in the past. We'll be more than happy to look at it again if you'd like, but we have looked at that and considered that as a cost-saving measure 3 to 4 years ago, and it just didn't pencil out.
So, Councilor Mack, let's, I think we may have some other other councilors with questions too, so let's give everybody a shot. And then Councilor Servadius.
I'll take a whack at it. First and foremost, thank you all for showing up. Those that spoke, and I want to iterate Councilmember Wassinger's comments. Thank you for your civility. For those of you that didn't speak, I know none of you are sitting there because you're thrilled. So I appreciate you being here and weighing in. I'm going to talk on the surface, I think, to the 4 folks that spoke, and we've hit on some of this, and then I want to go into my specific thoughts. Mr. Fry, thank you. I think we hit on yours, O&M. The studies, you quoted a number of $500 million, 500 million, and maybe, I don't know if that number is correct or not. I think we can agree that a lot of times in this process, the public process, a lot of money gets spent on studies to come out with an end product. And I think, to use Mr. Ross's language, that's one of the lessons we're always trying to learn, is how to become more efficient. The public process, unfortunately, is different than the private process. I don't know if that number is accurate that you quoted, but I think we agree on the concept there, and I think we all feel that way up here. 25% reserves, that question comes up all the time, and I think you referenced that, if I understood your question correctly. Is that the correct number? Well, that's something we can talk about. It's, as Patricia pointed out, that's kind of a standard guiding principle. So that's 25% reserve in case something catastrophic goes wrong. That's different than the beginning fund balance. I know there's a lot of slides and numbers that went up there, and I'll come back to this, but one of the things that staff is trying to do in this rate study is use up all of the, it's really fund balance. I don't want to mix up the term reserve, but it's fund balance or excess that might be in there that we've acquired. Get that as lean as possible. And there were a couple instances, though, where we start to build that excess back up because of anticipated projects coming. So please know that staff is working very hard to get those whittled down. But we still do keep reserve, just like most folks probably have some kind of an emergency fund at their house that's just prudent to have in case we have a catastrophe of some sort. Mr. Ross, wastewater biggest percentage. No doubt the moving target is something that we talk about all the time. I came on board in 2012, really as this was getting kicked off. And our project at that time, the initial studies were based on, as Patricia mentioned, $70 to $79 million, an activated sludge technology, which is the settling ponds that exist out at Crescent Harbor. So we were looking at that. As we looked into it further, we decided to go with a much more modern technology, which is the MBR, membrane bioreactor technology, to carry us through the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years, because the activated sludge, these settling ponds, I could just, if the cameras were on the crowd right now, you could see people going, no, just let it settle and scoop it out later. That technology is very antiquated. So that was the first big jump in that number. So all of the previous studies that we've done, while they were somewhat relevant because they gave us data, when that whole process changed, that really started to change that dynamic. And so I guess one of the lessons we learned there was maybe, we should have studied a little bit more. Sorry, Mr. Fry. But we studied a little more before we went public, but in that going public, in that process and getting through all of that, that's when I came onto council. That's when we decided to go with the more modern technology. And of course, as Ms. Wassinger pointed out, the GCCM process, when we went through that target moved, and we got to own some of that. That target moved as the plant was developed, and we added some other technologies like the dryer that increased that cost. And I don't want to spend a ton of time on the history, but I'll own some of that. That number did move, but there's reasons that it moved. Mr. Sturman, the number of connections, this is a great point. Kathy, somebody jump in here, utilities maybe. I'm going to throw out a number of maybe 6,000 units-ish. Let's say we pick a number like 6,000 that equates to a population of 22.5. Now, some of that population is Navy, but we usually look at it as some kind of a connection, whether it's an apartment or connections. And so I wish, I forget who it was, I think it was Mr. Ryan, talked about all these homes we're building. I don't know where Mr. Ryan went. I wish we were building a couple hundred homes a year. The number, I don't know what you might think around town, but it's much, much less than that. And that person still needs water to their home, wastewater carried away. So if we can build efficiently some of these bigger developments, Gary Oak, and other ones that are out there, the Hillside Project, that's just what I'm calling it, but that does add economies of scale. But just adding a home or two or three, we still have all that infrastructure to maintain that these costs go towards. So that's just trying to answer some of those questions. I want to jump into my comments as I watch this. I pay these bills too, and I appreciate the burden that this puts on people anytime we have to come forward and talk about a cost. One thing I remind folks is there's 5 services here. Water, you get water to your house. Stormwater, to convey stormwater away in a lot of cases. It's not, maybe some people, I said this to someone, they said, well, I have downspouts. I don't have any stormwater that goes away from my house. Well, it's the city's infrastructure also that we have to carry it away from your neighbors so they don't flood you possibly. Sewer, pretty straightforward. You flush the toilet, you want it to go away. Garbage, that's the solid waste, and then recycling. The part here, when we look at these numbers and we talk about some of these rates not changing for 4 years, I'm going to kind of go shame on all of us. I wish this were free. Inflation is one of those things, to me, it's like gravity. We know that it exists. You drop your pen, it falls. Why do things cost more every year? I don't know. I wish they didn't. But if you truly look at inflation, which is interest on top of interest on top of interest, it's a curve that goes like this. It's not linear. And so if we don't do a good job of planning and we say, let's just have these rates stay stagnant for 4 years, then when you have to make that difference up, it's, for lack of a word, it is brutal. It's very telling on the budget. I get that. And I wish, when I look back at that slide of 2013 when we were at the bottom for sewer rates, that'd be awesome if we just upgraded all of our infrastructure and we had new technology. But when you're sitting here with old, outdated technology and looking at that project in front of you and how we have to gear up for that, it's very daunting. And so, and then you throw in things like a 200% increase in recycling rates. We could decide as a council to stop recycling. It all goes into solid waste. So you throw everything in your recycling bin into solid waste. I'm not saying that's a good idea, but that went up 26%. Those are things that are out of our control, and there are some things we could do here, like forego some of the capital improvements. I'm not saying that's the answer either. But there's a lot of history here, and I apologize. I wish there was a way to make it go away and that things didn't cost more every year. But when we put off, if we're not keeping pace with inflation, and then we have to come to you and ask for 4% or 6%, the math kind of obviously works out. We're not here to make money. The city's not a corporation, a for-profit corporation. So that's something I think a lesson learned we could do a better job of. Rather than coming in saying, hey, we'll let it go for 3 or 4 years, but then we need 6 or 7%, is we have to incrementally keep pace with inflation. And finally, I guess the insurance deductible, to me, that's a no-brainer. It's not going to move the needle tremendously on rates, but it appeared to pay for itself in the first year. So I think that's something we should move forward with. Anyway, I'll stop there at the moment. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Heisen?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to try and keep this coherent. I've got notes all over the place. I'd like to echo my peers by saying thank you so much. I know that this is, to come and spend your Tuesday night here with us is not the most exciting thing you could be doing. And so we really very much appreciate it when you come to give us your feedback. Thank you. And there were some really good questions. I want to address the studies. I think the $500 million on studies. I think I know where that came from. Patricia, I don't know what page it was, but for the CWF estimated costs rates, let's see, 28 maybe? 28 of the...
So we're looking at the clean water facility, this one?
Yeah, is that where,
That's
okay.
not cost out.
Well, right, we didn't spend like 120 on the study.
Nope.
The study said if the facility costs 120 million,
Yes.
then your rate might be 118 a month.
Right.
Yeah, so it's all the same study, yeah. But the cool thing is that when we thought it was 120 million, our rates were gonna be 118 a month, and now that it cost 148 million, the rates are only 110. So we have been able to close that gap. I was flipping through there trying to figure out where you're coming up with that number. I was like, I think I solved that one. So that's that question. And the 25% reserve, we're always asking what the right number is. Again, for basically an emergency fund. And correct me if I'm wrong, but things like that are why, when recycling went from $45 a ton to $135 a ton, that was not reflected in anybody's bills. We were able to absorb that cost, kind of hoping it would be a short-term deal. Doesn't look like that's going to be the case. So, it's things that we put away for literally a rainy day in some cases that help us to absorb those things so that everybody's bill doesn't go up every time there's a glitch in the market. Sorry, appreciate your patience. Do we realize that's a lot of money? Yes. We all live inside city limits. We all pay these same utility rates. We realize it's a lot of money. I recently canceled my Comcast, and I was looking through a bill once, and there was an $8 a month local sports fee or something, $8 a month. And I'm like, I don't even know what that is. I'm not using it. I don't benefit from that. So, I'm not even getting a service there. Please know that anything that shows up on a utility bill, that is a service that you you're physically receiving. And on that note, we pay $7 million a year in debt service.
On the wastewater treatment.
Okay, if any of you have a chance to talk to your state or federal legislators, tell them it is obnoxious that municipalities have to pay interest on loans that we get to do capital improvements. We have to bring you water. We have to transfer stormwater. We have to do all these things. They're mandatory, and yet when we borrow money to do these huge projects, we all have to pay interest on that. I think that's ridiculous. That's a whole other soapbox for another day, but on that subject, $7 million a year for the privilege of borrowing the money to, anyway. Let's see, what else do I have here? Reserve studies, future cap rates. I think I might have gotten everything. Okay, so in terms of options, the projects listed, I mean, have been carefully looked at and prioritized and times. You know, I think the arteries and heart was a really good analogy, Mr. Mack, because we can't keep, you know, putting off infrastructure improvements is what makes things big and expensive in the first place. So putting off that kind of, those projects isn't going to help us in the long run at all. I'm wondering about the insurance deductible with Mr. Savadius, what that would actually look like in dollars. And, you know, we do have an emergency fund, so if we had to up our deductible to save everybody a few dollars, I'm okay with that. I'm curious, Ms. Rosen, what would happen if we suspended our recycling altogether? What if the city, I mean, I know that we would still be hauling the same amount of stuff away, but is the tipping fee less than the recycling? Well, it's about the same.
The tipping, solid waste tipping fee is $2 a ton more than recycling right now.
Okay, so that's.
And again, we would still be handling the same amount of material, so it's not really gonna reduce staff necessarily or equipment, because, you know, we still need to pick up the same amount of material every week.
Yeah, and it's frustrating, you know, because, yeah, our bill goes up from them, and we have to pay them to take it, so that has to be covered, so your bill goes up, and it just keeps spiraling down, and that's situations like that where we have no option, and isn't really much we can do is so frustrating. Okay, so what if we stop recycling? That was my... And if I think of anything else, I'll come back. I think I might have gotten everything. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Larson.
Thank you, Mayor. Rates are going to go up. It's the way things work. Unfortunately, the costs go up. But I'll start off by saying I cannot support the rate increases that we're looking at right here. There are a lot of reasons why this proposal is on the table, and I understand that. And as Councilmember Savadius said, shame on us for leaving rates at a flat rate for so long. I'm not looking to lay blame. We had cost overruns. We had costs that come to the city after the fact that have increased the cost of doing business for us. What I'm not looking to do is lay blame here. There's plenty of that to go around, but where the blame cannot rest is on the ratepayer. We have to make some adjustments, but if you look at the single-family total monthly utility bill proposals, it's on page 68 of your packet. From 2019 to 2022, we are looking at a rate increase over the course of 3 years of 20.25%. I cannot abide by that. We need to explore efficiencies. We need to look for cost-saving measures. We need to absorb and share in this burden instead of just shoveling it off onto the ratepayers and saying, well, this is the cost of doing business. What I haven't seen, what I haven't heard is, how do we change things? How do we look at things differently? What I hear a lot is that that's the way it's always been done, or that's the way we did it before. And that's not going to change anything. And I'm telling you, I need to see some change, because I cannot vote in good conscience to continue doing things the way we've done it, if that's the way this looks. In 9 years, wastewater has already gone from $40 to $110. And we're looking at 130 a couple of years from now with this proposal. We have some good options here to look at. Postponing this rate increase, at least for a little while, till we look at some of these others, I would say is one of the other no-brainers. Examining and changing the planned capital projects. I understand that a lot of work and effort and study has been put into that, but that was before we were faced with this rate increase. That was before we were in this position. And I don't think that it's going to hurt to take a second and harder look at some of the things that we already have planned. Maybe we keep them in there and we don't make any changes, but we owe it to the taxpayers and the ratepayers of this city to take a look, a hard look, an honest and make an honest assessment of what that looks like moving forward. And maybe for a while we change that reserve percentage to a lower percentage with the plan that we'll see if we can build that back up. but we're holding to this 25%, and that's driving rates. And I know that changing the insurance deductible is a little bit of a difference, might make a little bit of a difference. But if you make a lot of little bits of difference, we can make a big difference. And that's what I'm asking for, is to look at what we're doing and how we're doing it and find the little bits. Thank you.
Councilor Wiesner?
Thank you, Mayor. That'll be hard to follow up, Councilor Larson. Good comments. I too want to thank everybody who has showed up here this evening, taking the time away from sitting at home watching a great TV show or having a libation to come down here and help us, understand what it is, the decisions that we have to make. And I get, hopefully you all get that these decisions weigh heavily on each and every one of us. And your comments and your time is greatly appreciated. So I too have a few problems with the increase in general. I try to look at this from the business standpoint and try to look at this and break this down into each of the individual components that we're looking at. And, some of this I can certainly justify in my mind. Obviously solid waste has been a problem for all the counties in the state. It's actually a national problem. In fact, it's an international problem. And it's certainly something that we were not able to predict. We were not able to, even hindsight, look back and say, oh, we should have seen that coming. But there are some things that we probably could have done different and moving forward, and hopefully we learn the lessons. And, part of that is, sitting with no rate increases for several years, while we know that the cost of doing business continues to rise. Probably not a real wise move. I guess what I have a problem with is I'm trying to internalize some of this and really, wrap my mind around it. And there's a couple of figures, and maybe, Patricia, you can help me with these, that especially in the wastewater side, that I'm having a problem with. And the reason I'm having a problem with them is because in May of 2018, we sat at a workshop discussing the cost overruns for this wastewater treatment plant. And we sat in that workshop with the similar rate study folks, there was quite a shock that had occurred, in that March to May time involving the funding of the facility. And it was pointed out to us in May 1st of 2018 that the existing rate study, based upon all the information we had in front of us at that time, was sufficient, that there would be no additional rate increases due to the additional money that needed to be borrowed, the additional bonding capabilities of the facility. And here we are finding ourselves just about a year and a half later saying, whoops, well, there's a couple of things we missed when we discussed that in May of 2018. And I understand how things can be missed. Understand, of course, that the council, we make decisions based upon the best information given us, and staff does a fantastic job of delivering information. You guys, when we ask for it, you bring us all the charts, you bring us all the graphs, and I greatly appreciate that. But I'm having some problems with the math here because we're talking about an additional 5% increase over the proposed increase that was in the rate study as of May 1 of 2018. That showed about a 2.5% increase that could be expected in 2021 in the wastewater revenue requirements. We're now coming back saying that 2.5% is not enough. We need 7.5%. In my mind, that's a additional 5% that somehow we missed. And staff has supplied a fantastic explanation. We've got some increased insurance costs. We've got some increased utilities costs. And those costs are in operation and maintenance as far as revenue requirements. They're not debt service. And when we look at, wastewater revenue requirements, the operation and maintenance portion of it being just over $4 million, just using the graph. And so when we look at the fact that the operation and maintenance is only a third of the overall wastewater budget, and we're talking about an overall increase of an additional 5% above and beyond that was expected in May of 2018, and that's all applying to the operation and maintenance. I mean, that's where we're being told the missing
I can
costs.
explain the difference for you.
Okay, yeah.
So if you go back here to this slide, May 1st of 2018, the cost of the plant was estimated at $140 million. With GMP 13 that was passed at the end of April of 18, that happened after the rate study was completed. That was an additional $8 million to get us up to $148 million. We utilized fund balance for that difference, so that is why the rates had to be adjusted to build for that fund balance issue.
Okay, so then let me make sure I have the understanding correct, because the earlier presentation was very clear. Utilities and insurance, if you want
Those
to bring...
were things that had changed from when he just looked at it. He just pulled a couple of things up. But when you go and look at the dates and when things were approved, on April 17th of 2018, the $8 million GMP, additional for GMP 13, was what was added to the rates for the 2020 rate study. It wasn't in the $140 million because our plant is at $148 million.
Okay, so again, I just want to make sure I understand.
Yeah, I'm just
the
saying, when I
reasoning.
looked at his May 1st of 2018, it was based on $140 million plant cost.
So the real increase reason for the rate increase is a combination of
multiple things.
Insurance, utility rates, and the increased $8 million increase in cost in the sewage treatment plant that occurred after the May 1st study.
It occurred on April 17th, but the study numbers did not reflect that. They reflected $140 million versus $148 million.
So the information we were given on May 1st, which was after April 17th, was...
But he wouldn't have had time. I mean, that happened within a week and a half period. He came and presented on May 1st. Those numbers were already given to us before he presented. I don't know how the timing changed, so I'm just telling you what
Sure.
the facts showed
Well, I
going back.
appreciate that. I appreciate
and
that.
I can't speak for what happened then. I can't speak for anything that that may have gotten missed, but I do know when you go and look, 140 million versus 148 is what the difference, one of the big differences is in the rates.
So again, I'm trying to understand the difference, right? And earlier in an earlier slide, it was presented power, insurance. I don't know that the increased cost in the plant, has been brought up really as part of the driver of this.
It has to be one of the drivers. Capital improvements are a driver of rates.
And so when we were given that rate study on May 1st and told that the increased cost of the plant was not going to affect the rates, that was based then also on a figure that wasn't totally accurate.
What I remember, and I could be wrong, it wasn't going to affect loans. We weren't going to get any more loans to cover that difference. We used fund balance.
Oh, I actually watched back the tape, and
Okay.
what we were...
Did they actually say
the
that?
question we asked was whether or not the increased cost of the plant was going to affect the rates, and the answer we got was no.
But the
That-
rates were going to be adjusted when the plant was done.
Correct, and they were
okay.
going to be adjusted to the figures that we have here, which are different figures than we're working with. They were going to be adjusted to
Right.
the
107.38 instead of
107.38 versus the 110.48.
Okay.
Yeah, correct. So, again, I'm just trying to wrap my head around it. I want to make sure, because things weren't jiving, right? I mean, the math doesn't work for just increase in insurance costs and increase in power costs. We've got also this additional $8 million that we paid out of the fund balance that we've got to get back into the fund.
Over time.
And so we're catching back up with that.
Right.
Okay. I have to agree with Councilor Larson that I think that there's other options out there that maybe we haven't looked at, and I don't know that there's a big, humongous, gigantic fix. I don't know that there's a fix-all, that there's one thing that we're going to look at and be able to say, this one thing is going to, make this all go away. I think there's a lot of little things that maybe have yet to be discussed that I don't know that we've totally discussed that. Because as you folks get it, this is big money we're dealing with. And there's a lot of figures jumping around. And I can't tell you how much, Patricia, I appreciate, you staying on top of this and keeping us informed and having the answers. But I just don't know that we've done as good a job as we possibly can in looking at every little nuance that we can look at that could affect possible change. So, at this point in time, I don't know that I have enough information of my own in my mind to be able to support this. And I'm going to, request of staff, ask staff to let's put our thinking caps on. Let's work together. I know this is not, there's no easy answers here. There's going to be difficult answers, but I guess for me to be able to feel comfortable with passing this rate increase on to our citizens at this point in time, I just need some more answers. And I don't know that they're answers about how we got here, but I guess maybe they're answers about what other options we've looked at. You folks, you're smart folks. Maybe you've thought of them all, and maybe you've looked at every little avenue that any of us can come up with, but I don't know that I have all that information that I need to be able to support this at this point. Thank you, though, for your answers, Patricia. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
So, Councilor Servadius.
Thank you. So I think what would make sense, staff can certainly come back and we can take some time to go through this. I want to make sure we get it right. I don't want to kick the can down the road. It would be very easy sitting up here politically to go, we'll never raise rates again, no new taxes. And I know nobody's saying that. But what I think we need to do is probably lock ourselves in a room. Of course, it would be open to the public because it's a meeting on a Saturday and sit here with the Capitol. They gave us options. So rather than say staff come back with more options, we need to sit and wade through these options and say which capital projects do we want to cut? Specifically, what do we not want to do or change? There's a bunch of options. There's a ton of data in front of us. So I think they need, I would want, if I was staff, more clear direction on what exactly to cut or to look at rather than just saying, come back to us in a month or we schedule a workshop. That's my thought. But in the end, that's a decision we need to make as a legislative body is what do we not do? Because we're not here, this isn't a for-profit business. This is staff's best work at covering these costs. Period. And we could say, well, these costs are not costs that we're going to incur, then that's something we take on. But at the moment, these are what it takes to cover these costs. So I don't want to totally, what's it called, the messenger? Don't shoot the messenger or something? I don't know. I think we need to give some very clear instruction, or we need to get together as a group, whether it's in a workshop format or we continue this meeting because it's a lighter meeting, but start wading through these capital improvement projects. A lot of that stuff is fixed, the O&M, the debt service, that's not going away. We have to pay back what we borrowed. So that would be my thoughts.
Councilor Watson.
Yes, I agree. I think the options that we have, and there's so many different things we could do regarding our 25% rainy day reserves, our capital improvement projects, recycling. It's a lot in, I would like maybe to sit down and see exactly what those numbers are to the ratepayer. What would it look like from a 25 to a 20%? Or can we do different reserves in the different funds? Does water fund need as much as wastewater? So to me, there are a lot of things, what makes sense? What capital improvement projects are the most important? But that, to me, it maybe will take a little bit longer conversation to really have you guys help us with that and really see what those numbers would add up to. Because I agree, if we can move the needle and make this, do the best that we can so that we're not making the mistakes that we've made in the past, possibly, with rate increases, so that we don't do that going forward, so that we learn our lesson. I would agree with, I would like to take some of my time, an afternoon, a weekend, whatever that would take, just to sort of see what some of those numbers would pencil out to. I am in agreement with doing something like that.
So can I comment on that? So it would be helpful, the rate study, we have to give it to Sean. He's a consultant, he charges us for his time. So if we want to be efficient, it would be good for council to come up with what they would like to see changed. And then I can go back to Sean and ask him to adjust those things in the rate study and come back with what that impact to the rates would be. If we have a lot of options for him, I'm fine with that. I just want you to know that then that just adds up the time if you guys have a strong plan in mind to what you would like to see changed. As you said, though, the capital improvements as well as the reserve are the two big ones that could make a difference if you choose to move them down.
Well, with those, though, I think that for me, to give my thoughts on what I would want to see changed, I need some questions answered, though, because I want to be responsible too with the money, and I want to make sure that we're having enough reserved in the different funds. I want to make sure that we're getting the capital improvement projects, like Mr. Mack said, that protect the heart of what we're building. And so to me, would want to be prudent in those types of changes and just have a discussion with my fellow council members too, so that sort of we're all, we may never be all on the same page, but at least get some thoughts and ideas. I think we work well together on what the priorities are. Right. Maybe just a little bit of time so that we know what is prudent and responsible to present to maybe change.
Councilor Heisen.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a suggestion, a proposal, it's not a motion, that, this obviously could be a meeting in and of itself, and obviously staff can't come back to us with the information we want unless they know what we want. And since we are paying a consultant to do the rate study, it wouldn't make any sense to do this and then have him go back to the drawing board. So I would propose that we set a firm deadline, like end of business Friday, for us to send staff our very specific questions or scenarios. Like, what would it look like if we lowered the reserve to 20%? What would it look like at 18%? How would we prioritize the capital improvement projects? I mean, really, really specific criteria and questions and scenarios. Get all that staff by the end of the week so that they can get it to Mr. Horn, who can do what he does, and then we can schedule a meeting. Is that something that would work?
That would at least get something to start with, yes.
Right. Because just saying more options isn't really helpful.
I'm not sure what other options
right.
to come back with.
Right, yeah, it gives very specific scenarios to come back with numbers on, and yeah, I mean, if that's an extra afternoon or a Saturday, I mean, even if we managed to shave a few dollars a month off of this, I think that would be time well spent. So that would be my proposal, is just get staff our questions by the end of the week and schedule a follow-up meeting.
I'd like to tweak that a little bit.
Wait, I think Councilor Larson did you have your hand up?
No, I deferred to Councilmember Heisen.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Councilor Mack.
Thank you, Mayor. I agree with Councilmember Heisen. I would suggest maybe towards the end of the month here, another 2 weeks instead of by the end of the business this Friday. Sure. Do you see any issues with taking an extra week there, Patricia? I don't have my calendar, but perhaps by next Friday, not this Friday. So I don't know when we can schedule a meeting, what everybody's schedule looks like, but I'm in favor of sitting down with the council members. Sounds like each one of us has some different questions and different issues. Once we can gather, huddle, and figure those out, so we're not wasting anybody else's time, your time, and come with some smart proposals and suggestions and questions.
Councilor Larson.
Thank you, Mayor. I think that sounds like a great way forward, but we're also not in the weeds here at the dais. We don't know the best practices and processes, and we can't review. So what I'm going to ask staff to do as well is take a look at, are there areas where we can explore efficiencies? Are there areas where we can look at some cost-saving measures? We're going to look at some big ticket items like possibly capital projects and possibly lowering the amount of the reserve. But again, it's those little bits and pieces too. I think that we shouldn't leave any stone unturned. So maybe looking to get some input from city staff while we're at that meeting. This isn't going to be just driven by and from the council. We need to know what you think about, all right, we took another look at this and maybe there's something that can be manipulated. Maybe there's some cost savings that can be derived from some process that we haven't looked at in a while. Because I don't think that, correct me if I'm wrong, we've tasked the city staff in quite some time to say, hey, large companies, municipalities, organizations do it all the time. They task their people to say, go and find me some cost savings. Even in good times, I don't think that we've done that in quite some time. I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, those of you who've been around, but I know we haven't done it in the last couple of years since I've been here. So I think that should be a part of the equation as well.
You may remember the conversation. I meet with some counselors on a periodic basis, and I was in business of my own for a number of years, and then we sold the business. I was about 3/4 of the way through my career, and so the new owners came in and asked me to spend a month determining what I would do if the income dropped by 10%. In other words, you're going to have to make a 10% reduction in what you do. It was not an exercise that I enjoyed, and in fact, it was a heck of a lot of work and a lot of time. And I went back a month later, and they said, well, that's decent. They said, now I want you to do another 10%. So it was a 20% number that I was working with, as if we had 20% less to work with. And I guess the reason I bring this up is, yeah, that's a private business, and it's pretty easy for them to do that, and it was not easy to accomplish. But markets change, and it's been a while, but we're going to see a decrease at some point in revenues in our economy, and we're going to have to potentially make some cuts at that time anyway. So it's not a bad exercise. It's not easy. I can tell you it's not easy, and in fact, it's frightening. But I think that's maybe the story that you remembered. I don't recall during my time on council that we've ever done that with staff. So, I'm sorry. Anyway, that's a true story. So, yeah. We do have a recommended action to approve this motion. It doesn't sound like we're going to do that, and it sounds like we're going to communicate with staff, certainly ask for some ideas, and then accept ideas from council. Yes, Councilor Servadius.
One of the things that timelines we're talking about, I think the public asked why 3 years, or maybe it was up here, Mr. Mack. If we're going out, please weigh in before we send staff off. Does anyone want to see different? I think 3 years is realistic because things do change. Look at tipping fees, recycling fees, possible Navy participation. And of course, if the Navy comes in and that changes the dynamic, we're not just going to keep rolling along as nothing happened. We will immediately, we'll know in advance that agreement is being put together, so that'll factor in. But is 3 years a fair timeline?
Councilman Servadius, I think that's an excellent timeline. This is not only local, but it's pretty much what national economists are going by right now, is there's a 36 to a 48-month window. I would be comfortable with looking at everything on a 36-month plan.
Councilor Larson?
Thank you, Mayor. One of the things that we talked about earlier as well was making this more palpable. And I think part of that might be stretching out that time frame. I'd be willing to look at a 3, but also a 5-year plan. That was one of the things that I had written down earlier, is if we don't want to hit everyone with a rate increase over the next 3 years that equals 20%, what if we expand that out? And so I would like to see a 5-year plan as well.
Anyone else? Staff questions or input about that?
From me?
Time frame?
Nope.
Okay, Councilor
Can
Heisen?
I weigh in? Can I weigh in real quick?
Mhm.
So you have two pieces of code that require an annual review of rates, both in water and stormwater. And so if you're wanting to push out the time frame, I would suggest maybe making a code change as well that reflects that, or removing that piece from the code, because that's the only two rates that have an annual review requirement.
So we haven't changed our rates, but we've reviewed them, is what you're saying. Water?
There's a requirement in code that those rates be reviewed annually for stormwater and water.
But my question is, we have not raised the rates,
No.
but we apparently reviewed them.
So if we put this off, maybe.
So we haven't, say that again, we have an annual requirement.
So in both water and stormwater, there's a requirement that the rates be reviewed annually to ensure that the rates properly pay for the services provided.
Isn't that what we're doing?
Councilor.
Since 2016, it looks like they have been reviewed at least once or twice a year for when they looked at the clean water facility, they were looking at all the other rates too. Since I've been here. It wasn't just wastewater that was being looked at.
Councilor Weiser?
Thank you, Mayor. I don't certainly, changing the, I'm going to say payback period, because I think that's really what Councilor Larson is referring to. Right now, we're looking to make these funds whole at the 25% reserve rate, and we're looking to do it over a 3-year period. I don't think stretching that out and making those funds whole over a 5-year period, in other words, taking a little bit longer time to catch up, where possibly we may be in the negative for a short period of time as far as the 25% balance, but bringing it back up certainly would not preclude us from looking at the rates on an annual basis. We would just be looking at stretching out the amount to get the fund balances to the 25% level longer, which would basically be pushing out some of the increase for a longer period of time. That make sense?
Sort of, because when you look at the actual way he did it, he didn't try to make it whole right away. He used up all the fund balance, and then when it started going in the negative is when he looked at it. And sometimes it was 2024, sometimes it was 2025. So the fund balance making it whole didn't happen on all of them in 3 years. But the 25, if that's the level, that's where this rate study was set to not go any higher than that, to make sure we maximized only going to 25%, not keeping it higher than that, other than storm drain, which was a slow build to the next one. Use up all the fund balance and then slowly build for the next project, the DOE required one.
Councilor Heisen?
Just to clarify where we go from here, Councilor Mack suggested next Friday, so that would be basically the end of the month. So we would have a week and a half to really dig through all of this information and then get our questions over to staff so that they can forward them to Sean by end of the month. Just make sure that we're all on the same page.
Councilor Servadius?
And so the two areas to focus on for our instruction then, correct me if I'm wrong, but is reserve percent and capital projects.
Insurance deductible.
Well, the insurance deductible, I won't say it's budget dust. I think that's kind of a no-brainer that we do that. It pays for itself in the first year.
Yep.
And so, does that translate into, I don't even know if it would,
It'll definitely be put into the calculation.
right, in the long term, that's a wise decision. I don't know if it's going to move the needle, and I don't mean that lightly when I say budget dust, but I don't know that move the needle on the rates when you look at the size of the budget, but it's just good business practice to do that. So I think that's our homework.
Councilor Mack?
I'd just like to make an addition to Council Member Servadius is what we're focusing on, but between now and next week, could I have the staff work up some kind of numbers for the next 36 months if some of these projects that are online were to go through, what some estimated impact fees are worth to the city, in addition to how many new hookups and things like that. Just the growth for the next 3 years.
Okay, so, yeah, I'll have to work with Steve on that one. But I did look up the amount in some paperwork. I dug deeper. You're right, it was 0.5% growth. That was calculated.
Mayor, Mr. Mack, just a cautionary note, if I could, please. We can give great numbers about the number of applications we have in the office, the number of units which are projected. We could even maybe guesstimate, and I use that word purposefully, as to when they might start construction upon approval. But we have no way of knowing for sure, sir, whether those units will come into being in that 36-month window. And so it would have to be a sort of a heavily couched number. I mean, we can come up with what we have in the permit process, but it would be a guess at best.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Powers.
Okay. Any other questions or input? Staff? Clear as mud?
Got lots of notes.
Okay.
Thank you, Patricia. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, we will move on then at this point to item number 7A, Resolution 2004, Declaration of Emergency dated February 6th, 2020, and we have our fire chief.
Evening, Mayor and Council. As you may remember, we had some rain here earlier this month, carryover from the January. We did set up a proclamation. We put stuff out on Channel 10, the website, press releases about the occurrence and the problems that we were incurring at the time. We're now coming back to get a resolution for the emergency powers in order to do what we did. The intent of this was if there was a need for some expenditures without getting to the council first, we had the authority to do that. Now this is the resolution to finish the declaration of emergency up so that we are in line with Island County and the state of Washington, so that when it come time to do FEMA refund or reimbursements, we have that already in our hands so we can go with the county and get our resolution in order to get reimbursement from FEMA. The recommended action tonight is to authorize the mayor to sign Resolution 20-04, the declaration of emergency.
Okay, see if the public has any input or questions. Now would be the time. Okay, back to council. Councilor Zerbadias.
Thank you. I just want to take a moment to share, Chief, Public Works, everyone, thank you for all the hard work that went on during this time. I should probably not be on social media, but I like it because it's a good way to communicate and it's a good way to get kind of a litmus test of what people are thinking and saying. And just to share some information, when the city declared an emergency and asked for, it was a stage 3 water restriction, there's a lot of comments online about why do we have to stop using water when it's raining? We're not in a drought condition. Well, that wasn't the reason for the water restriction. The water restriction is because there was too much water. There was too much water entering, whether it was a crack in a pipe somewhere, a root, just manhole covers. And all of that, when the ground gets so saturated, that water eventually finds its way in, whether through it's a manhole or a pipe. And so that's why the plant was being inundated with so much water. So it was interesting, entertaining. I think people were being serious. I don't think they were trolling the city. Maybe they were. But the amount of comments about people not understanding, so when something like that goes out, it just means we're trying to slow down the amount of water coming to the plant. So when we say water restriction, the less you flush or leave the faucet on or run the washing machine, it's less it hits that plant in a given 24 hours or whatever. That's what we're trying to accomplish, not because there was a drought, and that's why we're restricting water usage. Thank you.
Well stated. Okay, Councilor Larson.
Thank you, Mayor. I move that we authorize the mayor to sign Resolution 20-04, the declaration of emergency.
Second.
Got a motion and a second to authorize the mayor to sign Resolution 2004, declaration of emergency. Motion by Councilor Larson, second by Councilor Wassinger. Seeing no other input or questions, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes unanimously. We are down now to our last item on our agenda tonight, which is item number 9A. Appoint Anna Thompson Assistant City Attorney as the interim city attorney. And I see we have Anna in the back of the room. Anna is moving towards and our city administrator, Mr. Oborn.
Yeah, we'll kind of team tag here, just to give you kind of a little understanding here in detail of where this is coming up with our loss of our city attorney. We have the vacancy right now. We are contracting with Reed and Grafta, who our previous city attorney now works for and has a lot of expertise in helping us. We're trying to stay in budget because we kind of allocated the savings we have with that position being vacant in the short term and the work that we need. And so we're trying to budget 16 hours a week is probably the magic number that kind of gets us into that savings where we break even. We're looking for efficiencies, and we're kind of splitting work between us, given that Anna Thompson is part-time. We did increase her hours from 20 to 28 to kind of accommodate that extra work. She's already an attorney, like we talked about, and has already been doing civil matters. We're looking at increasing the efficiency in the department. Since she's part-time, I'm kind of agreeing in the interim to deal with the admin and also utilizing the legal assistant to kind of help me with that. And then she could focus on the area she's able to do, which is legal, which is the area I can't do. So this is an interim measure. So I think with the mayor, and I recommend that you go ahead and approve appointing Anna Thompson as the assistant city attorney currently the assistant city attorney as the interim city attorney. As talked about in here, there's some legal requirements in there of why we need somebody designated. We were able to get by with the short term with having 2 assistant attorneys, but longer term, I think we really need somebody designated. I think she's prepared to take that role as the acting or interim city attorney, and we recommend that you go ahead and appoint her.
Councilor Larson.
Thank you, Mayor. I have 2 questions for Anna. The first is, have you been tracking the proceedings of this evening?
I have, in great detail in the back room.
And the second question is, do you still want to do this?
Indeed. I'm answering the call.
So I should make sure there's nobody from the public that would question or have any input here. Okay. Back to council. Councilman Servadius.
Thank you. So we've got the title of interim city attorney. Is there a process then that we will go for appointing a permanent city attorney, or what is the process moving forward?
I can speak to that. I think right now we're just trying to get in this interim. We're trying to kind of get a rhythm going. This may be an option, or we may look at appointing somebody else as a full-time attorney in the future, or we may look at contracting out. So we're kind of looking at 3 options. This is kind of the option, we're doing kind of a part option where there's certainly she can't do everything, and we have the option, and we have an existing contract for additional services, and we're working under that official contract. We didn't have to amend it. We just kind of have a little bit more of an understanding because there's a little bit more we're using than we did before with Weed and Grafta. So we're kind of moving ahead. Our kind of plan is to kind of get into the stable area, kind of see how it's going, and then come back look at 3 months from now or so, and then see if we want to continue with this option or make some modifications. But right now, we're just trying to get into this interim option and test it out and learn from it.
So do we, I don't know, we've got 2 attorneys now. I mean, can we be interim forever? Should there be a date here where we make a decision? I mean, one of the things we do is we don't have this ad infinitum expenditure of funds on a contract.
So, under the policy manual, any department head interim appointments over 3 months in length have to be approved by council, but there is no end date specified in the policy manual to my recollection. So, as long as council has approved it, the mayor's able to appoint for in excess of 3 months for a department head appointment.
All right, thank you.
Yes, Councilor Heisen.
I move to confirm the mayor's appointment of Anna Thompson to interim city attorney.
Second.
Got a motion and second to confirm the mayor's appointment of Anna Thompson to interim city attorney. Motion by Councillor Heisen. I'm going to give the second to Councillor Wassinger. Any other questions or input? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, that concludes our agenda for this evening. Councillor Larson.
Thank you, Mayor. Motion to adjourn.
Second.
We got a motion and second to adjourn. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes unanimously. We are adjourned.